Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Conventional Wisdom Podcast, part of the FreedomCast Network. I'm your host, Samuel Vernon. Welcome to episode 3. I'm so very glad that you are tuning in. I'm excited to get started on today's topic, which I hope will be entertaining for you as well as informative. And this particular topic is near and dear to me. I thought about this for a while in the past before ever thinking I would put it up on a podcast, and I found it to be so insightful. It really helped me out in so many different aspects of my life, and I believe it will do the same for you as well. If you can understand what we're going to talk about today, you can really get at the heart of so many issues, from personal dilemmas in your own life to heated debates on current events. So we are going to talk today about values and their importance within a hierarchy. The world is full of values and virtues, and the simple act of trying to rank order them will give us a tremendous amount of insight and clarity into the world around us. So I will go over all that and what I believe is the proper way to think about your values and discuss several key elements in understanding your value structure. So what is a value? We need to know what we're talking about here. Now, I didn't come up with this definition, however, I do find it profound and insightful, and that is a value is something that you hold more important than your feelings. No matter how you feel, it doesn't matter, because a value is still valuable. So let's say you value fitness. Just because you're feeling lazy one day, you still go to the gym. It's because you value fitness. You're not feeling like going to the gym, but you still do it. So it doesn't matter what you're feeling at the time. Values represent something important that is independent of our ever-changing feelings and opinions. This distinction between feelings and values I find to be incredibly important, and we should keep this in mind as we move forward through this discussion. Now, if you're skeptical of this distinction between values and feelings, just imagine for a second, let's take a value like honesty, which I think we would all agree is a pretty good value to have. It's the value of telling the truth to the best of your ability as you know it. Now imagine if everyone decided tomorrow to wake up and their honesty was entirely based on how they felt. So take, for example, the mechanic down the street. Do you think that he would charge you a fair price if he was feeling upset that day? No, he would overcharge you. He'd be feeling like kind of upset, woke up on the wrong side of the bed, decided to charge you more. And how about within your marriage? Do you believe that there would be more or less marital problems when it already is difficult to be brutally honest with your partner, to cut to the core of the issue? If you're feeling bad about that, then why not lie about it? So that distinction between values and feelings, very important, and let's keep that in mind. So let's talk a little bit about the structure itself. So I talked about a value hierarchy, and let's talk about that hierarchy, because I think a lot of people have in their minds a sort of pyramid style hierarchy where the most important values are at the top. And I think this is normal because most important things are elevated above the rest. But a while back, I changed my view of this, and I decided to actually invert this structure, to think that the most important values are foundational. That, to me, that made all the difference, because it meant that the greatest values are actually the ones on the bottom supporting all the rest. They're the strongest ones. They are the most stable. And this to me made a lot of sense, because it implies we need to have our foundations built right so that everything on top is stable and your worldview is somewhat stable. With a strong enough foundation, metaphorically speaking, you can build anything from a skyscraper to a sports arena. So with that in mind, let's get to the actual values. Let's dive into the meat of this discussion. So I came up with just a quick list of some values just to give you an idea, although I don't believe you really need it, but just to give you an idea of some values. This is in no particular order of importance, but a few of them that I came up with would be something like beauty, community, family, marriage, good health, leadership, logic, truth, humility, education, self-sacrifice, and gratitude. Those are just a few that I thought were pretty important and easy enough to jot down. But coming up with a list of values isn't incredibly difficult, and most people can do it. But now the question becomes, can you rank them? It's not so easy. So what would you say if I posed the question, which is the more important value, beauty or humility? Both are values. Is one more important than the other? As silly as that sounds, I did actually try to sit down and give a ranking to all the values that I could come up with. I would actually sit down and ask the question, which is more important, X or Y? I didn't actually get very far because there were just way too many pairs and there was really no discernible winner when matching something like the beauty and the humility. It didn't really matter a ton with these less important values. But I noticed something. It really mattered a lot once you start getting into what I call the foundational values. Values that are so incredibly important that they absolutely need to be ranked very high on the list and, metaphorically speaking, at the bottom of the structure, part of the foundation. A really quick example of this would be something like freedom versus good health, let's say. And if you listen to my previous podcast on COVID, you know my thoughts on that. And freedom certainly is the greater value, and people risk their health for their freedoms. So to me, that one was clear. So I came to this conclusion that the rank order of your values really only matters at the foundation. When values start to become so important that it really does matter which ones are more important than the others. Now, as you climb up the structure, values can be swapped in and out for other values, and that actually makes for the wonderful diversity in lifestyles and culture. Just like I said before, metaphorically speaking, with a strong and stable enough foundation, you can build anything from a skyscraper to a sports arena. You know, different lifestyles emerge at the upper parts of the structure. But it's those foundational values that are really pinning everything together. So let's look at the consequences of this. Let's take a look at a foundational value and let's tamper with it a little bit and see what happens. All right, so I assert that justice is pretty important. We build our laws around it, but it's also something that can guide us from the day to day. You can easily spot an injustice when it takes place, and people can act accordingly. It's a very compelling force within us, so to speak. For instance, if you have ever yearned for the wrongs in the world to be righted, if you have ever wished karma would pay a visit to someone who quote-unquote deserved it, then you have sought justice. If you take something like justice, which I believe to be one of those foundational values, and you modify it in any way, maybe slap some adjective in front of it like the terms social or environmental, you cease to have justice. In fact, you can quickly produce an incredible amount of injustice and evil by doing so. There is a reason why Lady Justice is blind. You know, the statue that's holding the scales, she's got the blindfold over her. In order for there to even be justice, it must be unbiased and equal. As soon as you qualify it with an adjective, like racial or environmental or social, it's like taking off that blindfold and targeting a specific outcome. As an example, during the 2020 riots in the US, many lives were lost, businesses burned down, livelihoods destroyed. Some rioters were arrested, and you might think that justice was going to be served to those rioters. However, hardly anyone was prosecuted because the local DAs wouldn't charge them for one reason or another. It could be out of fear for the repercussions or sympathy for that cause. In the first instance, there is a lack of courage. And in the latter, there is that perversion of that justice, with that social or racial justice put in front of it, those judges being, those DAs being sympathetic for racial justice, let's say. Either way, no justice was served, and that value was completely devalued. None of the guilty parties will be required to pay for what they did, the damage they caused, or even the lives that they took. Now, many people actually find this to be okay. They would gladly substitute justice for racial justice, but my guess is that these people haven't really given much thought into their values and this hierarchy. I don't believe that they would feel the same way if they somehow have been wronged and they thought, okay, well, I'm going to seek out justice for this. but the scales of racial justice were tipped against them. Parenthetically, I do have a lot to say about justice. I find it to be very interesting. I once posed the question, how can you define justice with no mention of law or government? After all, the idea of justice can exist outside of a governing body, namely, if a small community decides to live on some mountainside somewhere. But it's not an easy thing to do, and I urge you to give it a try. The best I could come up with is something like the good guys get rewarded and the bad guys get punished. Although this notion is a simple one, it's far from simplistic. It involves the dichotomy of good and evil, as well as suggests someone or something dishing out that consequence. If you'll remember my first episode on wisdom, I described wisdom as having some element of the good in it, good with a capital G. Otherwise, it's just some smart or clever application of the information that you have. I believe justice has this exact same idea as well. There is some good component to it. After all, you wouldn't say that justice has been done when someone cheats their way through life, yet still has good things come their way, right? So that there's a cheater that, even though they're cheating, they still get good stuff come their way. There's still, something's not right there. Justice has this good element baked into it. There are, in fact, other words with this same idea, and I encourage you to try and think of a couple. Interestingly enough, many of these words I have found are part of these foundational values that we're talking about. And I'll just name one real quick that I mentioned before, and that is bravery or courage. But without bravery, how could you even administer the justice, especially in the face of the threats and violence, as was the case in the prosecution of the rioters? So you can muddle the definition of a value by modifying it slightly, like the term justice becomes social justice. You can also see this with the truth being my truth, right? I'm sure people have heard that. But you can also outright replace justice with something similar, something like fairness. I believe many people in our society today have put an unwarranted amount of value in fairness, way too much. I mean, which is understandable. We all want things to be fairer. Life isn't fair, though. And funny enough, my dad used to say this to us as kids. I absolutely hated it every time he said it because I wanted so badly to have a fair shot at everything, right? I think all kids do. I think we naturally want things to be fair. But if you really think about it, there's some parts of life that just simply are not fair. A great example of this, and it's an obvious one, is attractiveness. For those that are born with good genes and are very attractive, life is just easier for them, plain and simple. People are nicer to you if you're attractive. They'll offer you more opportunities. They will go help you if they see you struggling. And the opposite sex will almost trip over themselves to approach you. On the other hand, if you are below average in attractiveness, you have to work that much harder on a sense of humor or on your character to make up for that lost social interactions. Now, I'm not just saying, oh, well, life isn't fair, so we shouldn't even bother. We as a society should try to make things as fair as possible. I completely agree with that. But there are some things about life that are just simply unfair. And unfortunately, I feel like there's too many people out there that inappropriately value fairness way too much. One example of this would be the body positivity movement, or the beauty at all sizes. Now, I want to be delicate with my words here, because they can be easily misconstrued, given what I've already said, that life is simply not fair and that some people are attractive and some aren't. But the simple fact is there is a difference between the unattractive and the attractive. You see the attempt in this movement to completely eradicate that difference because there is indeed an unequitable distribution of beauty within the population. Some people have it and some don't, and that's easy to see that that's not fair. But they have elevated fairness to such a degree that they are now clashing that value with truth, meaning they are trying to redefine the meaning of what an attractive person is, like the definition, in order for things to be fairer. The problem with this is that you start to clash with truth, and I believe that truth is one of those things that should never be compromised. Too much evil has occurred in the world when enough people buy into a lie. So to generalize this, if you take a lesser value and try to make it part of the foundation, what's going to happen is it will come up against contradiction after contradiction. And in order for you to stubbornly adhere to your values, you indeed have to dismiss logic and reason and all the other values that come up against it. It's incredibly dangerous to overvalue the wrong thing. If fairness is your number one concern, how easy would it be to look around at the world and ask, well, who's to blame for all this unfairness? Why is this happening? This is not right. Somebody is responsible. And from there, it's all too easy to target the beneficiaries of life's fortunes as the culprit. The ones who are born lucky, the ones who are born attractive, born into rich families, naturally smart, or naturally gifted. This is a perfect recipe to cook up hatred and anger, resentment, loathing for all those who have, and in the meanwhile, you don't even realize that if you had valued the correct thing, like personal responsibility over this fairness notion, you could have overcome a lot of the bad luck that you've been dealt and still achieve despite your bad hand. So prioritize your values. Another great example of this importance of prioritizing your values. I recently had a conversation with a relative about these priorities, and I asked them to list a few of the things that they value. There were many, but I just want to hone in on two that were said: education and character. I asked which one was more important, as I have done with all of my values, and this person at first had a pretty hard time deciding, and that's very reasonable. Like I said, it's not often that you're asked to rank your values, but I then suggested to imagine a person A, who's extremely educated but poor character, side by side with person B, who has far less intelligence, let's say, but great character. With that explanation, it was easy to choose a winner. Character trumps education. This is where the conversation went elsewhere, but I'd like to continue it here and now. Because I think, first of all, I agree that education is very important, but I also think that parents push that sort of thing pretty hard on their kids. I remember the pressure from my family to get into a great university, and I'm positive I'm not alone here. I'm sure the vast number of teenagers feel some sort of pressure to make it into a good college or university. Not only that, it's very apparent in movies and in the media. How many times have you seen a movie where the writers give a background of the main character? He's got a bachelor's in chemical engineering from Stanford, master's in molecular biology at Yale, PhD in astrophysics from MIT, blah, blah, blah. I see this sort of thing on movies all the time, and I think now if you know what you're looking for, I think you'll see it pop up all the time too. And if you need a quick example, I can remember in National Treasure, they did this to describe Nicolas Cage's character. So this technique is used to express how highly educated the main character or even the villain is, and it is perhaps a great storytelling technique, but it constantly adds to the value of education to the point of overvalue. Remember, education is still a value. I'm in full support of a great education. But if character is more important than education, which was clear when looking at the two people side by side, I wonder if there's a greater push from parents to develop a child's character. Now, I doubt it, but why? If family and society push a great education to the point of anxiety amongst teens, why wouldn't they do the same thing for character? The answer is they don't, because too few people stop to understand their value structure and what positions their values held. Imagine a world where kids and teenagers had more conversations at the dinner table around the importance of integrity, honesty, humility, and perseverance than conversations like, oh, hey, how are your grades? Or what universities have you applied to? I mean, if a complete stranger comes to me and tells me that they went to such and such school with a 4.0 GPA, I know nothing about their character, whether I trust this person or even if I should respect them. Hell, they could have cheated their way through all of that or been given some sort of free ride. Character is far more important than pedagogy. And you really only understand this when you've looked at your values and understood which are the foundational values and which ones are more important than the others. It's like having perfect 20/20 vision into these complex topics. You can reduce either side of a debate down to their core values and then ask yourself, which one do I align with? Which one is more important to me? I truly believe that understanding all of this is like being handed a map and a compass when you're lost in the wilderness. You may be in an unfamiliar territory, but you have the tools to navigate it and find your way. Now at this point, I have yet to give you what I believe are the most important values and list their order. I mentioned a few: justice, truth, courage, freedom, but I certainly haven't said what I believe is at the absolute bottom of the foundation, holding up all the rest. This is partially because I'm of the view that contemplating your value structure, especially what's at the bottom, and thinking more about their order is far more useful than simply handing you the answers. Also partially because I'm not deluded enough to think that I have all of these answers. This is why I have tried to give you a few examples of values that interact with one another and what happens when they are interchanged, mismatched, or misplaced. As far as the most foundational value, the one at the bottom, I think I'll leave this for a different episode or perhaps an episode series, but many of you probably have an idea of what should go there, or at least what I would say is the most important. But I will leave you with this. Almost everyone would agree that truth is one of those foundational values, and indeed it is. I have mentioned a few times already. Many of the greatest thinkers in history have dedicated their time and energy to the pursuit of truth. Giants such as Einstein, Aristotle, Newton, Locke, Hawking, or Nietzsche. But is this not something wise to consider? You can never always know the truth. You can never be 100% certain about everything. And indeed, there will be many times in your life where you are in uncharted intellectual waters, not knowing what to think, what is true, or even what actions to take. However, if you understand your values and their structure, if you can navigate the ocean of thoughts and ideas, you may not always know what is true or even factually correct, but you will always know which directions to go, and therefore you can never be lost. One could almost say that the idea of the structure itself is the most important value. I hope I have given you something to think about, and I thank you for joining me on this episode of Conventional Wisdom. I hope to see you soon. Conventional Wisdom is a FreedomCast production. You can visit us at freedomcast.us, or if you'd like to support our work, you can go to freedomcast.locals.com. We'll see you there.